for Neal Karlen's book, This Thing Called Life, which is a book about Prince's Odyssey on and off the record. And we're very pleased to have Neal here today talking with Emily Goldberg. I just want to remind you that the book itself actually publishes tomorrow. So we are ahead of the curve here. The book isn't even really out yet.
Book, This Thing Called Life,
there we go. And we are selling them on our website at majorsandquinn.com. So I will drop a link to that in the chat if you want to go directly there. Purchase on our website. We really appreciate you supporting an independent bookstore like Majors and Quinn. And you can also swing by the store. We are open to limited in-store browsing. So if you happen to be in the Twin Cities area, you can drop by Majors and Quinn. We're on Hennepin Avenue between noon and 7 daily. Don't forget your mask. So I am going to introduce our wonderful moderator today. We're so pleased to have her here to talk to Neal. She is the perfect moderator for this event. Emily Goldberg is the director of The Minneapolis Sound, which is the PBS documentary exploring the fertile 80s Minneapolis music scene. A Prince fan who moved to Minneapolis in '81, she risked freezing death to attend his glorious impromptu concerts at First Avenue. Goldberg and This Thing Called Life author Neal Karlen have been good friends for 30 years. So thank you so much, Emily, for being here. Thank you, everyone, for watching and for registering for this event. And thank you, Neal, for being a great friend of the store and for writing this book. And I will be back later to talk about the audience Q&A. So when you have questions, we will be taking them, and we can see the chat here. So drop your questions in the chat, and I will be back later to go through those. Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, Annie. Welcome, Neal. It's great to have you here.
For doing this, and thank you. They said there were a lot of people from everyone in my life is out there. So I'm thinking of New York, people who last saw me at 25 at Newsweek are going, well, he sure went to Seed, Thinking of people from, like, you never know when it hits. Anyway, thank you for moderating. You're the smartest person in town.
Let me introduce you. Okay. I'm going to read from your publisher's bio because it's perfect. So welcome, everybody, to the conversation. I'm really looking forward to talking with Neal about this and getting your questions. Neal Karlen was the only journalist that Prince granted in-depth press interviews to for over a dozen years, from before Purple Rain to when the artist changed his name to an unpronounceable glyph. Karlen interviewed Prince for 3 Rolling Stone cover stories, wrote 3 Chains O' Gold, Prince's rock video opera, as well as the Star's Last Testament, which we will talk about, which may be buried with Prince's will underneath Prince's vast and private compound, Paisley Park. According to Prince's former fiancée, Susanna Melvoin, Karlen was the only reporter who made Prince sound like what he really sounded like. Karlen quit writing about Prince a quarter century before the megastar died, but he never quit Prince, and the two remained friends for the last 31 years of the superstar's life. And with that, Neal, I was wondering if you could read the very beginning of the book to give us a flavor for what's coming.
Okay, sure. I think it sort of explains things. And again, thanks you guys for turning up. It's always easier to do nothing, and there's stuff going on. Anyway,
can you show us the cover, Neal?
This is the cover.
Hold it. Oh, that's great.
Hi, Rebecca. And it's coming out tomorrow, and it's I'm going to read the prelude, which is just a couple pages, and then the next chapter was excerpted in Rolling Stone today, so you can almost get the whole book, if in different places. So anyway, I'm goofing around here, but the first sentence I write is like the heaviest sentence I have ever written. I always hate the reading part of readings, for going to them, they're so boring. So
it's not boring. I've read it. It's not boring. Please go.
I pray to God Prince was dead by the time he hit the floor. I pray Prince wasn't cognizant, even for a mite of a moment, that he was dying alone in a nondescript elevator in a wonder-bred suburb of the racially fractured city that was one day too late in telling him his hometown blacks, whites, the whole Crayola box of colors and ethnicities, loved Prince as much as he loved Minneapolis. Because there's one thing I'm positive I know about Prince. After knowing him in forever alternating cycles of greater, lesser, and sometimes not at all friendship over the final 31 years of his life, and our final peculiar phone conversation 3 weeks before he died, his greatest and perhaps only fear was dying alone. And I'm going to put on reading glasses because I've gotten old. Prince didn't care if the end came in a Chanhassen, Minnesota elevator inside a building where he owned all the buttons, or in an opulent prime minister's suite in a Paris hotel, inevitably and idiotically redecorated for his arrival by a clueless management apparently determined to recreate for his pleasure Liberace's living room. He just didn't want to die alone. I always told Prince I knew he didn't honestly consider me a friend. But as one of the few people in Minneapolis who was probably awake the way he always was in the middle of the night and was willing and able, as my favorite song of his is titled, to talk about loneliness and death. I even rubbed it in the opening of my third and last Rolling Stone story featuring Prince on the cover, published in 1990. Oh, this is a long time. This is from the story, how it begins. The phone rings at 4:48 in the morning. Hi, it's Prince, says the wide-awake voice calling from a room several yards down the hallway of this London hotel. Did I wake you up? No, you jerk. You never woke me. Well, actually you did a few times, but I was always happy to hear from you, even when you were so lonely and depressed you could barely speak. I told him I wanted to be a real writer, not the Bobo formerly known as Neal. I wanted to be Nathaniel West, and though he had no idea who Nathaniel West was, he seemed to understand completely. And we stayed in touch. Sometimes we talked on the phone several times a year, in the middle of the night, for between several minutes and several hours. Sometimes I got letters, sometimes on purple stationery. 2 of the 8 times I published what I thought were real books, I received anonymous purple flowers. Over 31 years, I guess we saw each other in preparation for published profiles on a couple of dozen occasions, saw each other socially 30 or 35 times, and talked on the phone a few hundred times, usually in the middle of the night. About 50 unanswered or unheard calls from an unknown number registered on my phone during the hours when only Prince would call. When he wrote, I'd always write him back care of Paisley Park. I have no idea if he ever got most of my letters because I never had any idea what the hell was going on over there, even when I used to visit. An hour before I quit on that story, I sent my editor a scan of an old letter he sent me that began, Neal, please treasure our friendship as I do. It's actually up there. It's in the book too, so I can prove it. Friendship is a part of this thing. I sent my editor a scan of an old letter he sent me that began, Neal, please treasure our friendship as I do. Yes, he drew an eye for an eye and ended, for real, I love you. Whoa, it's up there. I don't know why I sent the editor that letter. Perhaps I wanted her to know I really knew him. We really were friends. Or maybe I just wanted to read it again and smarten up. Still, like the rest of Minneapolis, I neglected to tell Prince I loved him back until it was too late. He once told me he believed in heaven, and he thought if he made it, it would look exactly like Earth. You can look it up, Rolling Stone, September 12th, 1985. If he was right, well, hey, Prince, will you give me a call one last time? I forgot to tell you something. I love you too. And that's the beginning, which sort of explains in whole what was, and it's weird wishing someone dies that way, but it was truly, I don't know if he had any other fears. It's the only one he ever enunciated. I have nothing but fears and anxieties, like appearing on Zoom in front of my entire life. But it's just very weird. There are very few celebrities who are unknown, and he was really unknown. And I don't know, moderate. Let's see, where were we?
Yeah, no, one of the things I was wondering was there have been so many books written about Prince, right? There's been, what, I don't know how many, you probably know, a lot, a lot. And there's a great scene in the book where someone runs into you in Sebastian Joe's, your Minneapolis cafe/office, and asks you what you're doing. And you say you're writing a book about Prince. And she's like, really? Another book about Prince? And you go home and burst into tears in the shower thinking, why am I doing this? What does this mean? What's the point? Can you talk about how this book is different from all the other books that have come before?
Yeah, and that's important. Like, why 4 years later do we need another Prince biography memoir? There are a lot of great ones written. And when this was said, when the woman said this, another book, I wasn't offended. It was like, yeah, there are a lot of books. In fact, and enough has happened in Prince's name since he died that you could probably write a post-mortem biography. So I went home and I got in the shower, I just taking a shower, and I burst into tears and I talked to Prince. I've never talked to the dead, well, the living dead, I guess. But I just said, what do you want me to say? Because there had been every kind of biography, every critical analysis, every dissection of every word he said or wrote. And all I remember was the letter he wrote, which is also in the book, that said, "Thanks for telling the truth," which is what he wrote me after I wrote my first cover story for Rolling Stone. I was still at Newsweek. Hi, guys. I don't know if I should have left. And I spent the previous year I spent my entire first part of the advance, and there wasn't going to be any more. And I'd just been reading everything, but I couldn't listen to these old tapes I had. I couldn't listen to him at 26, his ghosts, and I couldn't listen to my own ghosts, my 25-year-old ghosts.
These are the tapes of your conversation.
Yeah, he let me tape them. He had this rule that you couldn't tape starting in like 1990. And that started as kind of a joke, but he never minded, and he always knew. And I wasn't even planning on doing a biography. What we were saying was so interesting. And I did this before when, for a month, for another book I was writing, the only other music book I've written, which was the first one of my career, if you want to call it that, was Courtney Love. She had wandered into the story somehow, and she adopted me for a month, as she did and would call every night at 1 a.m. and talk nonstop. So I hit this back and tape recorded it, and someone I knew later was writing a biography, and I just gave her the tapes. And it's not like I had any thought in mind. It's not like when I'm taping people secretly. He always knew what was going on, and I don't think he wanted. People say, "Oh, you've got to write this book and stop goofing around," And then my place burned down, and I had a lot of stuff in it. I had a lot of bobbleheads, and a lot of people out there saved my life, which I won't go on about here. And some people keep telling me about Prince is saying this, and I don't. And I have a lot of friends who I respect who are into that realm. I don't want to stereotype, but sort of going Trekkie. And I have lots of people who don't think he's talking to me. And I don't think he was, even if he could, he'd be thinking about me, writing a biography about him. But in some ways, everything I own being burned, except a couple letters, one of which is burnt, you can see around things, and all my Prince tapes and notes, which I put into my computer 2 weeks before and was on my back as my place burned down. So like all I had was this Prince book, and I didn't know what to do. And then you saved my life. Anyway, it was almost as if he was going, people were saying, focus. He had been in that apartment once, and I had so much stuff around. I'm not a pack rat. I just have like weird Beavis and Butthead autographed drawhead, and it was sort of like focus, just focus. And
the fact that
Elizabeth Meyer was there because she's the executive editor at St. Martin's, who bought the book and gave me the time to gather myself and then just to write a biography memoir. And the reason I got away from your old question, which I never do, was there had been every kind of book written about him except for the guy, like the human being Prince. And you didn't even know if there was someone there. You know, that cartoon of unraveling the mummy till everything, and there's nothing there. And there was something there. And it was a very broken person. And I don't say that as, well, I do probably sound like an armchair psychologist, but just like with a broken heart, because I really did like him. A lot of this journey was discovering, was I his friend, or was I this niche, the 4 a.m. in the morning guy, the guy and that's who I wanted to show, was the human being. And there is so much BS about Prince that has been written that is just not true. And I at least wanted to get down, and maybe one person would, this is what he actually said. Here are actual tapes, and get it right. Although I did make the most hideous mistake with Susanna Melvoin, Wendy's twin sister, who is the greatest person and did me the kindest favor in getting me to talk to Prince. She used to be engaged to Prince, and I made a caption error. And I used to be a researcher, not a very good one, fact check. But, so that's what I decided to do, was him as a guy. I never liked him when he was in his rock star mode, but doing celebrity journalism when I was younger was, you get used to that kind of behavior. And he wasn't getting sued for predatory behavior. He gave millions away. So people might think he was a freak, but he really wasn't, especially compared by the norms of Hollywood. And it's one of the reasons he stayed in Minneapolis. Is this boring?
No, but one of the things I'm thinking about too, though, is it's also, like you said, it's a story about friendship. It's kind of about an unlikely friendship, right? When you first meet, you're a 25-year-old kid working for Newsweek, freelancing for Rolling Stone, and he decides to talk to you. And he's this huge rock star at the time. And yet it wouldn't seem like you have much in common, but it turns out that you did. Can you read that section in the book where you first are driving around Minneapolis together, the first time you rode together?
I should read?
You want to? Yeah.
Or should I talk?
Whatever you want to do, whatever you're more comfortable with.
It's, when I wrote a piece about a week after he died for the local hometown paper. He'd had an agreement about who died first, what would we do. And I was sure he'd be 94 playing like Muddy Waters or B.B. King. And I was sure I'd be hit by a bus that afternoon, And his thing he wanted was me to write one little article for the local paper, not like a big, and I did. And I hadn't typed his name in 26 years. And it just awakened in me the real question. I never thought as my friend. I hate reporters who conflate the importance of who they're writing, who they're writing about with their own importance. And I didn't want to be that guy. And it sounds so pompous. My friend Prince. It's like saying my friend Queen Elizabeth, Yeah. My friend Queen Elizabeth said to me yesterday. So I didn't talk about it. You and Chris, you are the only people who heard tapes that I had. I just did not talk about it. And everyone who knew him just did not talk about it. It's pretty interesting. And there was a huge revisionist history. Minneapolis, there's several thousand people who were always into Prince, but there was, this, right? I mean, I'm not making this up. Minneapolis was not that loving to him always.
In the beginning, especially, yeah.
This was the last place he was played in the country. And that revisionist history that happened seemingly overnight is sort of remarkable, where now that he's safely dead, which is a peculiarly Minnesotan remark. And I'm going to read a little piece that's from the first time I interviewed him. He hadn't talked to the press in 3 years, and he's vowed never to again. But he did agree to allow Lisa and Wendy from the Revolution, Wendy Melvoin and Lisa Coleman, to talk on his behalf. And he would appear on the cover of Rolling Stone. So they cut that deal, Jan Wenner in the business of getting that deal. And we talked, and it was good. I mean, it was nice. We got along. Oh, you know, and they went back and they talked to Wendy's identical twin sister, Susanna Melvoin, who was, engaged to Prince. And she said to him, "Why not check this guy out?" So I got a phone call in the airport. I was in the Denver airport. I was on vacation and rerouted my things. And you ever have those things where you realize no one in the world knows where you are? And it's like, did I hear my name? And you hear it again. And it's like, okay, who's dead? You know.
You were paged, right? You were paged.
Yeah. And they were saying, go to Minneapolis right away. He's going to talk. He's going to talk. So I get home. I go to my folks' house. And my mother goes, "The Prince called." She always called him the Prince. The Prince, and, but I hung up on him. She was talking to my aunt, and he sent for a limo, and for 2 days, didn't talk to me, just checked me out. He was rehearsing bands. It was pre-Paisley Park. And finally, he motioned to his car, and I got in, and I didn't take out my recorder or pad or anything, and just, we drove. We just drove. And I just remember Jan Wenner's last words. He got on the phone, and he just said, "I just want you to get enough words from him so we can put Prince Talks on the cover." And after about half an hour, I realized, dang, if I'd just been recording this, I'd already have enough words that, but it didn't turn out that way, but it turned out even better. And I hope this is the part, no, this isn't. Play that part of
page 105.
Yes, that's it. The first time we took a ride through
Minneapolis. Yep.
Okay, so at this point, this is the first interview I've done. I'm working at Newsweek, and no one there could, the big scoop of rock and roll. Who cares,
Right.
And I love all of them. But it just, people were like, "Oh, you must have thought you were so groovy." And it was like, no, I was like negative groovy. And if you only knew how, of all the people to pick to talk to, it's just very strange. The first time we took a ride through Minneapolis together, am I shouting? The first time we took a ride through Minneapolis together, I'm 25, touring the streets where he'd run as a kid, Prince was starting to explain the difference between the south side of Minneapolis and the north. I interrupted him. I have it on tape. And if you buy the audiobook, you get 22 excerpts of him on tape, along with some watches. Starting to explain the difference between the south side of Minneapolis and the north. I interrupted him. I have it on tape. "Oh, I know," I said. "My grandparents lived down there." I pointed toward Oliver Avenue North. I pointed to their house, which was still standing. "And there," I said, pointing at Worth Park, "is where I used to go sledding." "Oh, me too," he said, disbelieving. And I believed him when he said he didn't know I was from Minneapolis. He added, our sleds probably ran into each other." "You still owe me a flexible flyer," I replied. Then, in passing, I told him about my great uncle Augie, former owner of an eponymous sleazy strip bar on Hennepin Avenue. I didn't yet know that Augie's was one of the places where Prince's own father, John, had performed years before under the stage name of the fabulous Prince Rogers Nelson's. Prince, though, didn't say a thing. And then came the moment I knew was it. The moment where I had Prince. Every reporter knows that feeling when they're trusted, when they're finally trusted by an important source, and the agenda isn't necessarily all, quote unquote, the story. It is a moment I always warn friends about when they're getting interviewed. As we drove past Worth Park, I mentioned its grisly history as the dumping ground for the corpses of those who crossed the once powerful Minneapolis mob. The Minneapolis police hated working hits, and oftentimes the guys who got killed were worse than the killer. Minneapolis cops in the old days would sometimes drag a corpse several hundred yards across the city limits into Golden Valley, a first-ring suburb. Let them deal with the paperwork. Prince looked over at me from behind the wheel of his 1966 Thunderbird. He was smiling. It was the smile of gotcha, the smile of it. And I
That's
found kind of stupid there. And I didn't mean like, oh God, I already had enough words, but it was sort of like we got each other.
yeah. No, it's the beginning of a friendship there. And the fact that you both had crossed paths in North Minneapolis is fascinating, which people should read about in the book.
Yeah, I mean, it was so weird. I mean, he thought I was from New York, and I spent every weekend just a couple blocks away from him and next to the Dairy Queen on Plymouth Avenue.
When you were kids, yeah.
With their kids, and they stayed there when White Flight happened, the riots of the 60s.
Your grandparents did, yeah.
They said we'd gone enough, and we'd gone far enough that we walked across Europe. And my grandfather made wine. It's all in the book. You know?
Yeah. I think that's fascinating. So from there, you develop this friendship, and whether you recognized it or not. And he's sort of known as very mysterious, notoriously private. I mean, what do you say when people ask you, what was he like? What he called you in the middle of the night? What did you talk about? How would you describe him?
Well, he was so contradictory. I mean, we're all full of contradictions. We're kind and awful. We're vengeful and, angelic. And he had more compartments than anybody I know. So I was never his best friend. He always would say, oh, this is my best friend, somebody in the revolution. This is my sister, someone. And if he called you his best friend, usually by a week from Thursday, he'd never speak to you again. And it was just very strange. I mean, some people say that's strange behavior, but he was a broken person. I mean, it was funny. He said, he muddled the record as much as anyone. Well, it's been hard for a real biography to be written. And he said, I remember, I used to tease a lot of reporters early on and make up stuff just because I wanted them to focus on my music and not on me coming from a broken home. And he didn't mean a divorced home. My grandmother was divorced and lived on those streets in the 1920s. It was literally a broken home. And weirdly, or maybe not weirdly, what broke him as a human being also, I think, propelled him as a superstar. Plus talent, but you don't necessarily need the talent. But he had it, and he could do it from here. Even Bob Dylan, it's very odd. When Bob Dylan was 17 and at the University of Minnesota, he was a mile away from Prince, who was making music his mother. I mean, why here?
Yeah.
It's very strange.
One of the things that came up in that very first interview that you looked back on 30 years later and had kind of an aha moment was you asked him, why do you want to talk now? Right? You've been silent for years. Why do you want to talk now? And he said, because I don't want people to think I'm in prison.
Right.
What was that all about? Can you expand on that?
I don't want people to think I'm in prison. Immediately they feel like they're in prison. I mean, it's just one thing, I mean, it could have been the paparazzi, or there were a million things I'd heard, but I'd never heard that. And he really did. And he was sort of in the prison of himself, of his own genius. And I think I don't use that word lightly. I've only met a few true geniuses, and I wouldn't wish it on my worst enemy. He would talk about how he couldn't get his brain to stop. And it'd be like a pinball machine. He couldn't, I could do this band. I could write this song. He was constantly writing songs. So what we look at is like, oh, he was more prolific than anybody. It was both the most wonderful thing and why I really think he will be remembered. Although maybe they said that about Rudy Valley and, does anyone know Bing Crosby? In Minneapolis, they still don't remember the Mary Tyler Moore Show, the baristas at the coffee shop. Yeah. And I think he will be remembered. And Alex Hahn and Laura Tebert, who are biographers, very excellent books, deduced that he had played the guitar and the piano more than anybody in the history of recorded music. In their last book. I mean, he would practice for 16 hours. And I think part of it is what really killed him. It may say fentanyl on the death certificate, is that he lost 2 children, one a living birth, and he couldn't dance anymore. He had a double because jumping off speakers for 30 years in heels, but also his arms hurt from playing the guitar so much. And were numb. This stuff came out after he died. He was you know, that suddenly that he was around as long as he did and didn't, you know, OD at 27. And it really bugs me when, you know, people say, he died of a drug overdose, because he wasn't partying, you know,
Yeah. Yeah.
he just hurt. It was like a work related.
Did he ever talk to you about that? Did he talk to you about being in pain?
Well, this will sound nasty, but it's in the book, and I didn't want to read about. But yeah, I did drugs with him once. I had broken 5 bones in my leg, rollerblading, and I mentioned to him on the phone, or he had discovered there was a war at Lake of the Isles where Mary Tyler Moore was walking around between rollerbladers and bikers, nightfall and blah blah blah. And as soon as he found out I had a prescription for painkillers, he came over to my house. And usually he didn't come over to my house very much. And I didn't go, as time went on, I didn't like Paisley Park. It was ghoulish to me. It felt like Xanadu, you know, Citizen Kane.
Yeah.
And I thought that at the time. It was like, this was bad. Something bad was going to happen here.
Had a mausoleum feel to it. Yeah.
And he was over, and I just have, it's one chapter, and I fell asleep, and I wasn't getting high either. You know, my father cut me off when I walked into a door, but
your father's a doctor. We should add.
Yeah. And he was talking about since the Purple Rain tour, and he would talk about, this is part of the torment of being a genius too, was that, it was the only way. He got hurt at 25. The last 30 years of his life, he was in pain. There's you know, every video you see for Purple Rain, he is in pain. And he would say, I got hurt on the first leg of the tour in America, and my leg would get hit by this, or I'd jump off that, and things would hurt, and I'd want to just stop. But there was a voice inside me, like a Dybbuk or something, you know, just a spirit saying, "No, you don't stop. You'll stop when I tell you to stop."
Wow.
There was a thing, so he had to go on.
And we all benefited from that as audience members. I mean, you know, his physicality on stage was incredible.
Yeah, but he really felt inhabited by this being pushing him on, and it's why to accept that kind of pain, to entertain people is
yeah. So he came over to your house and took Percocet with you.
Yeah. Oh, and it's funny. I purposely, to calm me down, have my Mama Jamma. When we first met, he was trying to not say, well, I won't the MF word. He was trying very hard, and instead he was saying Mama Jamma. And I so loved it that he would either call me that or Casper. But he was very smart about people. I mean, a good way to get people to do stuff for you is to give them a nickname.
Yes.
No one else has. I mean, John F. Kennedy called Ben Bradley, the god of journalism, Benji, which no one did. And then he had Ben Bradley, oh my God, in his pocket for his, you know, and so Prince could be so smart, but he could also seem like the stupidest person you've ever met in your life. And it was on purpose. It was an act. What was I talking about right when I got it?
Well, we were going to talk about go ahead. No, go.
It's funny because this genius part, I just remember he would talk about how it wouldn't stop. And people say, why you? And it's a very good question, because I'm not the hippest guy, obviously. I'm not the best writer out there. I'm not, you've known me for a long time. People can probably already tell. I have this thing I've always had, which is why I turned to writing. I can't finish sentences, and I don't make transitions. And so I'll be talking about 6 different things at once, like we are now. And some people, go, you're crazy, especially me. I don't. And he always knew what I was talking about. It was
his brain might have been working at the same speed.
Well, he had this phrase. He'd say, "I don't like them because I can finish their sentences before they're done." And he could never finish my sentences, but he could follow.
Yeah. And he enjoyed the ping pongingness of it or whatever.
Yes. Yeah. And we played ping pong, but the thing that really turned him on. I mean, Andre Simone, who's great and is not happy.
Bass player. Yep.
Who was his, I think, last real best friend in the traditional sense of the word, whose house he lived at. And he's a great guy. His wife, Catherine. And I think they want to kill me. But
That's another story.
what said, I had one trick with basketball. I was like on third squad, 13 basketball. He was amazingly good. But what I could do was spin the ball on my finger. If you go to my Facebook page, there's a picture of me at 30 doing some tricks.
Harlem Globetrotters. Yeah.
The coach, I could have been practicing the cello and he wouldn't have cared. You know, I was the third string. And Andre said, yeah, that would have gotten his attention. And we realized, or he said, I mean, I have chosen to believe it just because it's fun to say, but I spent every weekend at the Dairy Queen. I mean, right where my grandparents lived, next door to the Dairy Queen, and where the kids hang out, and there was a hoop there. And I don't know why, do the things I learned from, I had Sweet Georgia Brown, the 45 record. I still have it to practice, like on constant loop. And Andre, Prince said, I remember, he called me Casper. He said, you were the guy who, and I didn't believe him. I thought he was.
Oh, he remembered you spinning the basketball.
Yeah, and Andre said, you know, that would have been it. That actually might be, that sounds true. I've chosen to, it's like me not choosing to believe I was his friend.
Yeah. And
I don't say that out of, you know, fake.
Well, one of the things you talk about is, that I thought was really interesting. You say, he was, I'm paraphrasing, but he was one of the loneliest people in the world, or loneliest person you ever met. And then you also said that you felt like people only knew 15% of him.
Yes. And again, it's heartbreaking. It's like, if you're talking about, he was the loneliest person I've ever met. And I'm not judging. He would say it. He always talked about being alone. And sometimes he'd talk about, I'm not lonely. I like being alone. And I remember the very first time I interviewed him, he showed me the field where Paisley Park was out in Chanhassen. And it was just farmland. And it's like, I'm going to build a 10 million. And he had just finished Purple Rain. So it was like, yeah, we're going to, you know, he was like he could do whatever. You sell 15 million records, you can be a cannibal and you're quirky, you know? And I got a chill. I don't talk to ghosts or again that. I said, what does Paisley Park mean? He said, I'm going to build this huge studio here in the middle of nowhere, and it's going to be called Paisley Park. I said, what does that mean? And he said, Paisley Park is where you can go when you need to be alone. And he meant all the time. It's the place. And it wasn't until 25 years later at Sonny Liston's grave, believe it or not, in Las Vegas.
Boxer.
That he found out that Sonny Liston died alone in his body. The boxer who Cassius Clay, later Muhammad Ali, knocked out against all odds in the greatest upset ever in 1964, and died 6 years later of a heroin overdose. Yeah. He was just totally punked. And Ali, Prince said was the only superstar he ever met who never let him down, couldn't talk when Prince finally met him. And he just whispered to him, say I'm sorry to Sonny. Because before the fight, he had belittled him. He had taken away his manhood. He's too ugly to be the champ. He acted crazy. It's worth YouTubing these things. And he thought he took his soul away from him. The way Prince he didn't want to just beat your band. He wanted to steal your girlfriend. You know, he wanted to take, you know, you to give him his wallet. But it was another one of his personas. It was in the book. I compare it to Iceberg Slim, who wrote the book Pimp, and it's how he sort of dressed in that famous 2004 induction ceremony. It was another of the 15. Yeah. But if anyone says, "Oh, I knew Prince, and this is everything about him," and he was, you know, a biographer, they're full of it. No one knew. I never knew more than 50%, and no one did. No one knew who his other friends were. No one knew who he was going out with. No one knew the full story. And I thought I was like, oh, the 4 a.m. as time went on, the 4 a.m. angst guy that he called. And that was my job. I knew he took his girlfriends around to see his folks in the morning, so he could. He loved his parents despite what he said, which is odd because his father destroyed him, John Nelson.
Completely abusive guy. Yeah, right.
And he used to say he was very good. He would study the science of lying. He'd have books on it.
Prince did?
He read. He liked homicide, and he loved sitcoms. I mean, these things, again, the guy. But no one knew the whole story. I mean, what? Prince loving Happy Days? He did the best Fonzie imitation. The thing I'm sorry for is that on our last phone call, which is actually, if you look at Rolling Stone today, it was excerpted. What a self-serving little putz.
No, but people want to hear about that last phone call. What was that like?
He did an imitation of Stanley on The Office, who was his favorite. That was his favorite show. He could talk endlessly about it. And again, you talk to friends and Andre, again, who lived with him for 4 years. He couldn't believe, he loved also the whitest shows out there. And I wish I had asked him that last conversation, which is the whole last chapter, where he called at 2 PM, and I was very alarmed because I'm not his 2 p.m. guy. I'm his 4 a.m. guy.
Yeah.
And I got very alarmed, and I just sensed something was wrong. And not just wrong. I could say, I thought it sounded like someone sort of dying. He said he was tired, which he never said before. He never said it. He didn't sound, I don't think he offed himself. I don't think he killed himself. Although he wasn't, it doesn't matter. He gave us what he gave us. But he never said he was tired before. Robert Creamer at Sports Illustrated wrote the definitive book on Babe Ruth about 15 years ago or 20 years ago. And he said what he really regretted was Babe Ruth was as into women as Prince was. If people wonder about Prince's sexuality, this is total value free. He was the straightest guy I've ever met. I mean, he was a dog, but he was a gentleman, But what the biographer of Babe Ruth said was he regretted that he never talked to a woman who had slept with Babe Ruth. He interviewed hundreds. And I didn't feel that because it felt like, well, in Minneapolis, everybody had, except you, Emily.
I didn't.
It's a bad, but I never talked to anyone who'd seen him sleep.
Actually sleep.
Yeah, and I was on tour. I was on tour with Prince, and he wouldn't. Everyone would be asleep on the plane flying into London. I feel so swingy.
No, it's what it is. Yeah.
And he'd be listening to that night's performance, and I described it as it was like when you see depictions of people in electric chairs when they've turned the juice on, and he was
So he always had that energy
on, and he couldn't turn it off. And thank God I'm not a genius, but I know that feeling of having so many thoughts in your head, none of mine finish, that I have to go running and just empty my head out. And then you look at someone like him, and it's astonishing. And his ability to really get along with everybody, that, when he said, "Don't make me black," when he was first signed, which is often used as proof that, he was, self-loathing.
Yeah, right.
And it wasn't true. He was a very proud African-American. He was always very political. He gave money to Spike Lee to help make Malcolm X in 1992, or, all the way back. It's funny. He put down a lot of these guys until Spike Lee paid homage to him in a movie. He hated Spike Lee till then. He thought he grew up bourgeois. He went to college.
Right. He's a college boy.
Miles Davis. It's like, I love. He said, "I love his music. I just don't want to be in the same mamma jamma room with him." And so they'd exchange tapes, and I have no idea where we're talking about.
We need to wrap up soon so we can get to questions. But one thing I wanted to ask you about was what you think happened with his will.
It's so weird. I'm afraid I sound like Art Hill, Art Hill. That's a sports writer. Who was like Art Bell, the 2 a.m. guy with spaceships landing and. Well,
but you helped him write this thing, right?
But I have in there. How do you write something that if you read, you'd say bullshit, and that's what kept happening. He hired me in 1993. I had already quit the Prince beat, but I collaborated with him on different things. And he wanted me to write a last testament to go along with his will. I hope the word testament doesn't mean will. It was
not the legal part, right?
Yeah. And he commissioned me to write this thing, and he was going to have in it the Love Symbol album. It was right when he was changing his name to that goofy glyph, and he was going to put the Love Symbol album that he just finished, his will, and this testament, which I wrote up. And it was weird. Like, why didn't he write it himself? But it's the one area he was insecure was his writing, which is weird because his lyrics are so, I loved you more than I did when you were mine.
Yeah, right. One of my favorite songs.
As great as that. It's been X years and X seconds since.
Yes. 13 days, yeah, right.
So, and he said it would go in a time capsule. That was his word. And there's been evidence that there is actually a time capsule he put together. In the European print store, there used to be, do you remember right on Lake and Hennepin there, near Majors and Quinn, there was a print store.
Yeah, yep.
And they had like one of those in London, and you can find it on YouTube, where Prince's vault, his time capsule. You couldn't see what was in it, but you could see down in there. It's on YouTube. While you're there, you might also want to look up John Nelson, his father, claiming that he wrote Purple Rain as he plays, and this is me, and he would, wearing a purple ruffled thing. And that's one of the secrets you'll find on the book too, is why he liked purple. He was politically conscious.
It's a great story.
Not what anyone thinks. And
but do you think it's somewhere buried out in Paisley Park in a field somewhere?
I do, because I only got paid once by Prince for anything. When I wrote the libretto to this rock opera with him, I said, "Will you pay me?" And I wanted him to, because then I'd be off. I couldn't write another article
because it would be unethical, right?
Reporter, I could only write. Well, this is a biography, but it's footnoted. And if he paid you, he tended to use it. He was famous in town for stiffing people. He was a human being. There are people he put on.
Meanwhile, giving lots of money to charities, though, too. So,
and he so cared about his legacy. He had a vault long before we found out Neil Young and Bob Dylan and Joe Schmenge had a vault. He really wanted it to pass on, and he knew history. He was so often compared to Mozart that he studied Mozart. Mm-hmm. Mozart wore purple too, and like Poole too. I think they started selling off Paisley Park. It's hundreds of acres. There's the building, and then there's hundreds of acres, and the estate has started selling it off. And I think in like 50 years or 20 years, a dump truck or tractor is going to unearth, as they build Paisley Park condos, this time capsule. He loved practical jokes, and I think this was his last practical joke, and he just did it too well. And I wouldn't be. I don't know that there is. I never saw the will.
Okay.
But that he said it, and I know I could usually tell when he was lying to me, but he really. That's why he loved the book Homicide, which was the guy who wrote The Wire and stuff, David Simon, because they have a long thing on the way investigators can tell if someone is lying. And he hoped to use it against record executives. Unfortunately, he had the most honest, menschy guys, Joel Austin of Warner's and Lenny Waronker. And so, these guys were telling him the truth while, the sleep everywhere around him. And they were personally hurt. He really liked them. And Owen Husney, people dealt with him early on, will know that. He would go, and talk to Mo about, Mo started as Frank Sinatra's accountant. I love that. And then he rose to run his record label. And he would ask about him and Dean Martin and them cutting. They were going to do they called it the Mafia's Greatest Hits. Mo produced an album at Sam Giancana's club. And he loved talking and hearing these old stories. He cared about history. And I think we talked about one of the things he how he'd want to be remembered is I think he would want to be remembered as a genius, as a Mozart. He wanted to be remembered. And I don't think he's the Rudy Valley or Bing Crosby or Mary Tyler Moore. But I think he wanted to be like Robert Johnson. It's interesting. The New York Times has started running obituaries of people they think now they should have. And it's a great series. And one of them they wrote about was Robert Johnson, the great Delta blues man who they know he's written 18 songs or something. And they know like 18 facts about him. He's the guy who supposedly went to the crossroads and
Right.
the devil. And I think he would have liked that. But we consider Robert Johnson the genius, you know, and it was interesting that they wrote an obit about him just around these 18 facts. And when I read it, I thought, that's the kind of obit he would have wanted. And I remember when I first said, this guy was my friend, I was reading a hatchet job in the Minneapolis Star Tribune that was totally unfair about him possibly using cocaine and, you know, just a druggie, a partying guy. Yeah. And it was, and the lawyer, the only source was buried deep. And he had sued Paisley Park 5 times. It was just garbage. And I just dropped the paper. I was so mad at the reporter. I found out who it was. Of course, there was no name on it. And I said, he smeared my friend. And I now love that reporter, even though he's only written, since I was 26, he's written nasty stuff about me. But I love him because he got me to say my friend, even though Prince had it in letters, you know.
Perfect place to stop, Neal. Let's take some questions because I know there are tons of them. Let's call Annie back.
Hello. Thank you so much, both of you. This has been great. I do have some questions for you. They are coming fast and furious here. So thank you, everyone, for your questions. I'm going to go with this one first.
You know, we're burning a cross in your front yard type question, you know. Editors always say, don't read the comments, you know.
Yeah, well, the comments are all very nice. You should know. Yeah, they're very nice, and also people just talking to each other about Prince as you would want.
You're being very nice.
No, there's one that says, Neal, I love your tangents. I bet that's what Prince loves.
I mean, people who haven't seen me since I was 25, I know I talk the same. I mean, my hair's not like that, but the New York people, it's like, my God, he hasn't changed at all. I never knew what he was talking about then. And you were.
Here's one. Majors in it's what is Neal's favorite album of Prince and why? That's from Melina.
I have 2 favorite albums. No, I have a favorite one, and it was it comes from when I did my first story on him. I was 25, and it was right after Purple Rain, so he was, you know, a master of the universe, and he'd recorded Around the World in a Day, and he said, "I'm so glad I recorded that right after Purple Rain because you know how easy it would have been to do the same chord." And that's the favorite one because he was working on the video for Raspberry Beret. That's on that album, and I love that song and I love that record, and he felt he had to explain that record. And so, you know, critically, I can write rock crit. I've done it, but it's not, you know, it's not like his critically best album. You know, I could say Sign of the Times and Proof, but that's the one. It's like the first, you remember that song that, you know, you had your first kiss with, and you'll forever love that Beach Boy song or whatever. So it was the first time where it was like, oh God, I got to see him in action.
Awesome. Here's one from Jay Iser. Was there a spiritual aspect to changing his name / persona? This was around the time you had mentioned the love symbol. What was that about? Do you know?
It was, well, there was symbolism around 10 years later. There's a chapter where he goes to a Hasidic rabbi. I'm doing a book then on the Kabbalah, so the only people who really know the Kabbalah, you know, so 12, you know, beard down to his chest, you can dig up his he doesn't want publicity. It was funny. He's the guy who turned Bob Dylan reconverted him back to Judaism, thereby becoming the first Hasidic Jew in Random Notes in Rolling Stone. Probably my biggest scoop in but he just wasn't impressed by that. So it was a time of him searching. Now he changed his name. There were some people who said, "Oh, he was trying to get out of his contract." I mean, it's a really stupid way to get out of your, my name's not Neal, it's Emily, and he talked about the old Prince being dead. I mean, this is what he told me. He probably had, I think he was his own Rashomon. He had his own six versions. He tells 6 different people. So they go, "Oh, this is how he was." And he was saying music was dead. He was behind the curve on rap really badly. And he was usually so far ahead of the curve. And it just killed him that people couldn't play an instrument, and he could play 27 instruments, including the clavinet, who couldn't write songs, were #1 on the charts, and he was in the top 1,000, and it just bothered him so much. And he did catch up, but the first time, one of his great engineers, Susan Rogers, quit when he did his first attempt at rap, but he just never really totally caught up. But in fact, as Questlove has pointed out, he was in fact the first real hip hopper, and just a lot of his attitudes and things that he did. So he really talked about Prince. I mean, Prince was dead, and I'm going to put this album in, and my will. And so I don't know. And I remember I just said, "Am I in it?" And he gave me this look, and it was funny because I describe his look as one that could stop a sundial, when he was unhappy, and it was sort of like so dismissive, but also he loved just fooling around. He loved people, so I'm not saying I'm in I'll be Melvin Dumar. I used to, do you remember the movie Melvin, and the guy who said he picked up Howard Hughes in the desert? Howard Hughes. After driving around Minneapolis with him for 3 days, I felt like I'd been with Howard Hughes. And Howard Hughes, who was played by Jason Robards, was surprisingly human. And I said I felt like Melvin Dumar after he'd ridden around with Howard Hughes. There was a guy there. There was a person. In his old neighborhood, is like, hey, he stopped at the stop signs and put on his blinker when no one was there. Very Minnesota.
I love that. I love that.
And and I miss it. I wish, I said, at the end of that first thing, I forgot. I never got to say I love you, but I never got to say I never told him I liked him.
He knew.
I never said, not Dean Martin's "Hey Pally," but I never just accepted that. And I don't know if that's my own low self-esteem. No, I just didn't want to be one of those hangers on, where, oh yes. Everyone in Minneapolis has a Prince story. A few of them are even true, so it's good to have tape. But he was a good guy. Unfortunately, that was 15% of him. And I don't mean he was a bad guy, 85%. He was 15% Jehovah's Witness. He was 15%. I love the rib tips at Rudolph's. He was 15% pimp. He was 15% guy who would be friends with a white Jewish boy from the suburbs, whose parents, who knew poverty, and that because my grandparents grew up with that in that neighborhood. That's where they stuck, the Slavs and the Jews and the African Americans back in the day.
I love the contradiction that he was a vegan who would go eat at Rudolph's.
Yeah, everyone was, he was a vegan except when he wasn't. Yeah. He was a Jehovah's Witness except when he wasn't. Which was most of the time. So he was all these things. People will say, that's not true. He did have a swear jar, except he would say the MF word, or mamma jamma. He would say the actual word, 50 times at Rudolph's. The same day he'd fine anyone who said dang. You know? So they're not lying. I'm not lying. And I'll stop talking 1 second. There's a guy, Londell McMillan, who is a lawyer of his and is involved with the estate, and they're suing him and he's involved, or maybe, I don't know, the money, who knows with it. And I read something he said where he said, Prince did not leave a will because he never thought he would die. And when I read that, I thought, this guy never met Prince. That's all he talked about was death and dying since the first moment I talked to him about it. And then I realized, how do I know what he talked to about Londell Macmillan? He probably just didn't talk to him about death. He talked about contracts. So I was guilty of, well, I know, but I don't pretend to know the whole package. And I think this book is, it's him. I mean, I finished it and it took 4 years. It was like, I'm too old to just, what's the obvious thing? You know, I almost didn't do this. And I finished, I'm glad, feeling like I had done right by a friend. And I really do take friendship seriously. Friends have saved my life, many people out there. And it felt good. It feels good to say that and not go, you know, friend, oh no, but just say friend.
What did he think about death? What did he say about death when you talked about it?
It changed. At first, he thought it would look exactly as it is now. You know, heaven would do that. And then sometimes he said, maybe I'm wrong. I mean, I have this thing. Maybe there is nothing. But if there is nothing, so what? At least I lived a life of purpose, trying to do something. You know. And then it became much more apocalyptic as he got into, well, he'd grown up in Seventh-day Adventist things. Although, again, that was the week he died, the Seventh-day Adventist magazine had, does anyone have proof that Prince was a Seventh-day Adventist? If so, please let us know, you know. And you could ask the choir master. And he was just so many parts. That's the thing. Yeah. We all have contradictions. And we're all human, and there was a there, you know, and a lot of people thought there wasn't. He wasn't like some ass clown, you know. He was a real person, and he was so loyal. His contradictions. The Rolling Stone editor, I didn't work at the magazine then, I worked at Newsweek, tried to take the first interview away. Oh no, we gotta have the music editor take it, and he wouldn't. He was more loyal to me than anybody has ever been. Someone who was considered the most disloyal guy in the history of show business, you know, who would fire his best friends and never speak to, you know, how to explain that kind of contradiction? You can't. It's just who he was. He was a Rubik's Cube, you know. That's a bad metaphor.
No, it's good. I like it.
But
well, there are a lot of questions still. So I think what we're going to do is I will send them to Neal.
And I will answer them.
You can answer them, and then we can email them to. Yeah. And we can just email them out to everyone who was registered, because there's some really good questions in here. But we do have to wrap it up, unfortunately. But one final thing, though, Neal, there have been a lot of questions about the audiobook. So I'd love for you to explain a little about, you know, what's in the audiobook. You read it yourself, which is not necessarily the norm with audiobooks. So that's really cool. And then what about the recordings? Tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah, there are 22 different recordings that are a prelude to each chapter, where you actually get to hear him talk, and usually talking like a human being. I mean, Emily's heard them. I mean,
they're fascinating.
He is a guy, you know, and I love the ones where he's having fun. I wish he had more fun growing up. I wish not growing up. I mean, in life, and just to hear him laugh is really great, you know. And but there are mistakes. You know, I made this egregious mistake in a caption, this little typo, and I owe Mi Ling an explanation. You know, it's you find those little things. It was while reading the audiobook, I found on page 7 the worst typo. Somehow it fell in there. It's my fault. So, and if it had run, it would have ruined. I mean, it's amazing how 5 letters can change everything, you know.
But there's great stuff in there where Prince says things like, I wish I didn't have to eat, you know, like eating was just something that took up too much time. I mean, you get there's great little nuggets in all of these little audio snippets.
He said, I wish I didn't have to see women. I mean, he was more priapic than anybody I know. And but he said, I wish I didn't have to see so many women, even though I think that was the downfall. You know, he should have married Susanna. And that humanness is what I hope comes out. And I think they'll be writing biographies about him in 100 years. And I didn't want it to be necessarily this piece of literature. I wanted it so at least they'd have some quotes that were real.
Yeah.
And leave it, you know, so someone who has the perspective and the talent and the knowledge. But I hope people like the story. What's interesting, they changed titles at the very end. I think Elizabeth came with the original title, which I loved, which was formerly known as, which is, you know, he was the artist formerly. And so it's now the book formerly known as. You know, sort of, but if it was crap, I wouldn't come on. I'd be embarrassed. I mean, it's just, there are too many people I care about in the Prince community, and just my friends out there who want to see what happened to that guy. It's just, he said one thing that really has hit me hard. He said it when he's 30. He said it was why he wouldn't do the Black Album. And there have been 190 explanations why he pulled that album. And he said, that is just an angry, mean album, and will be remembered by the last thing we do. And I didn't want that angry, mean album to be the last thing I did. And I'm of that age. I mean, I still think a bus is going to hit me, you know, tonight maybe. So I didn't want to just do another, you know, a celebrity bio of some schmuck. You know, there were 15 book proposals April 22nd, 2016, going around New York the day after Prince died. I didn't even go out there till July. And it's not because I was such a great guy. It's just, could I do it? Also, when you're writing about a genius and you're not a genius and you have realized this is a friend, you know you're not doing them justice, no matter how well you're able to put across what you found and what you think. But I will really write back. I mean, thank you, everyone.
Yeah, I'll gather all these questions and get them to Neal, and we'll send you another email like we did with the event access. One final question that I will answer. I saw a couple people asking, does Neal narrate the audiobook? Yes.
I do, and thank God, because I found this typo. And it was just a little,
yeah, I'm reading it. Yeah.
It was just changing the word father, parents to grandparents, and it read parents, and somehow those words have fallen off. I just hadn't noticed till I was reading it, and it doesn't sound like what big deal would that be? It would have been a huge deal because it would have said my parents live 2 blocks away from Prince. I would be saying I live 2 blocks from, you know.
Yeah. No.
And I had to call the editor. It's like, I got to say it. Stop the presses. I've always wanted to say it. I didn't actually do it, but it was, you know, I tried to make it as real and believable as possible. But again, how do you pass along the truth when, if you read this, you'd go bullshit, you know? And
well, there's a really nice comment from Tia who says, I look forward to reading the book tomorrow. Thank you for sharing your stories and your truth. And yeah, I would like to say that as well. Really nice way to end.
And you know,
that is a great way to end it. Yeah, exactly. So thank you, everyone.
Anybody out of town? It's in Uptown, and Prince had the great song Uptown, so you have to come.
Yeah.
Yes, I have put in the chat, since we've been talking about the audiobook so much, you know, it occurred to me there are ways to buy audiobooks from independent bookstores. You don't have to use Audible. I'm just going to throw it out there, which is fine if you do. But there is a thing called Libro FM. I put a link to the book on that service, which is basically exactly like that aforementioned app, just a different app. And you can purchase through independent bookstores using it. So audiobook will be available tomorrow.
Cool. I mean, it's one, if I hadn't, audiobooks are not of my world for some reason, you know. Okay, but just to hear him, 22 is, you know, and if you buy $100 gold book, you know, standard.
But Annie, there was also a question I noticed about whether any of the books are signed.
Oh, yes. So Neal has given us a limited number of book plates. So we have those in the first batch of books. And then at some point when we get more books in, we may be able to set something up. But of course, as you know, these times, it's all a little.
I think I figured something out. I have a post office box on Hennepin. If I give an address out, if you want the book signed, or
There you go.
Your signed books are actually go for less than, I'm used to. It's 2751 Hennepin Avenue. It's the UPS store, box 190, and I will pay postage back. It's just
Yes.
Don't say that, Neal. You're gonna go broke.
So here's what we'll say: is we have book plates on the first batch of books, and Neal may be able to come into the store at some point and sign future batches of books. However, if you end up with an unsigned copy for whatever reason, like it gets fulfilled and without having a book plate or sign, we will share with you that address that Neal just shared.
Yeah, I really want people to be happy with it, and not to please, but just that this is a lot of money to spend, and to invest this much time. And it is a real biography. It isn't just like me and my pally, Dean Martin, one of those books. Right. It is a full biography, and there's a lot of surprises. And would you like to buy some watches?
Well, thank you everyone for watching. Even if you're just tuning in, or if you ordered the book from us or anywhere else, or if you plan on checking out the audiobook, we just really appreciate you being here on the Majors and Quinn YouTube channel. Thank you, Neal and Emily, once again. Thank you to St. Martin's, which is the publisher of the book, who helped us set this up. And I just hope you all have a wonderful evening, and we will be in touch again with some answers to some of the questions we didn't get to. So thanks, everyone, and
Thank you,
have a
Annie.
wonderful evening. Bye.
Thank you, Annie. Thank you, Neal. Thanks.